Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. We're opening with the story of how one tired salesperson ended a ridiculous corporate motivation scheme using nothing but sarcasm, yellow balloons, and a perfectly worded HR complaint. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. How balloons brought down middle management. Back in the early to mid-2000s, my first real job was inside sales for a huge corporation. Picture rows of gray cubicles, those ancient boxy monitors humming like tired bees, fluorescent lights strong enough to bleach your soul. The whole depressing starter job package. Thankfully, the sales team was incredible. To this day, I'm still friends with some of them. But the middle management? An absolute charcuterie board of incompetence, ego, and bad ideas. One week they unveiled what they thought was the next revolutionary motivational tool. Not bonuses, not recognition, not better training. Nope, balloons. 3 yellow balloons tied to each salesperson's cubicle. Every time you made a sale, management would come by and pop one. Loudly, dramatically. Like some kind of corporate Hunger Games. By Wednesday, the floor looked like a sad party graveyard. Some people had 1 balloon left, some had none, and a few were clinging to their last balloon like it was their dignity. It was humiliating. And that was the point. Management wanted everyone to see who wasn't pulling their weight. People were embarrassed, a couple looked close to tears, one guy refused to leave his desk during lunch because he didn't want people walking by and seeing his empty string dangling like a failure flag. It pissed me off. So the following Monday, when the motivation balloons magically reappeared at everyone's desks, I came in with a plan and a giant Target bag full of yellow balloons I'd bought over the weekend. I started blowing them up, dozens, then taping them to every available surface of my cubicle. The walls, the desk, the shelves. I basically turned my workspace into a yellow balloon cave. It looked like Big Bird had exploded. Pretty soon, people were laughing, morale was better than it had been in weeks. I handed out balloons to my neighbors, and their cubicles started getting decorated too. Suddenly, the sales floor looked like a kid's birthday party instead of a corporate punishment chamber. Management did not appreciate the vibe shift. One of the middle managers, the kind of guy who treated a $50K salary like he was CEO of Google, marched over and demanded, "What exactly are you doing?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Oh, I just really love the yellow balloons. They brighten up my workspace, so I brought some from home." He did not like that answer. Pretty soon I saw a little manager huddle happening out of the corner of my eye, all of them glancing over at my cheerful balloon fortress while whispering like middle school mean girls. They were clearly debating how to deal with the fact that I had completely ruined their shame-based motivation system. And then one of them snapped. He marched over while I was on a call and started popping my personal balloons. Not the company's balloons, my balloons, the ones I'd bought. As soon as my call ended, I went straight to HR. "Hi, I'd like to file a report. A manager just destroyed my personal property at my workstation." Now, normally you'd expect HR to roll their eyes, but this was peak corporate. Everything had to be documented, investigated, and handled following policy. And the phrase, destruction of personal property, got their attention fast. HR took it seriously. They interviewed people, they contacted management, they sent very stern emails. By the end of the week, the balloon motivation program quietly disappeared and was never attempted again. Imagine trying to talk to a client and all of a sudden you hear the loud sounds of popped balloons. That'd make working even more of a nightmare because of the anxiety of being jump scared by this BS. And our second story. The genius who signed his own downfall. I worked as the head accountant for a company called Urban Tech Supply for almost 3 years. The name sounded solid, but in reality it was a typical government contract business, supplying equipment for the city, benches, trash cans, streetlights, some electronics for utility services, and sometimes bigger things like modules for smart bus stops. I wasn't a founder or a top manager, but in a company like that, accounting is the nervous system. Every payment, every certificate, every guarantee letter, and half of the creative paperwork passed through me with the usual, "Ira, this has to be done yesterday. The tender closes at 5. The owner was a guy named Mark. Nice, kind, a bit too soft. He was 28 and genuinely believed business was about team and values. His rich parents gave him the starting capital, a small office, a warehouse, a couple of vans, and the idea to go into government contracts and do everything right. And of course, his brilliant idea was to hire his college friend as CEO and managing director. That's how he got George. He liked to be called George with an English accent because it sounded more international. Among ourselves, we called him Gary, not because he was cute, but because it was short and matched his personality. All ego, all I. Gary came in with the energy of a startup bro who just read 3 leadership books and decided he was now a visionary founder, only without rockets, just tenders. For the first 2 weeks, he walked around the office like a general inspecting the troops. We're building an empire here, people. I don't want to hear impossible. I want to hear, how do we make it happen? Lawyers are parasites. They slow business down. That last line was his favorite. He said it so often our external legal team started jokingly counting how many times a day he'd call lawyers parasites. Because yes, our legal team was outsourced, a small firm that handled tenders and contracts for us. I was friends with one of their lawyers, John. We met in my first week at Urban Tech when I was panicking about how to correctly format a no-debt statement for a tender. He didn't laugh, just calmly explained what goes where, and we stayed in touch. John was the quiet type, but very attentive, the kind of person who notices things everybody else skips over. At the start of autumn, the city announced a big tender, supply a batch of LED systems for main streets and parks. The budget was big enough that Mark spent the evening pacing around the office with the smile of a kid who just found a bag of cash. Gary saw it as his chance to prove he was a genius. In 2 weeks, that contract is ours, he said. I'll handle everything personally. I got a bad feeling right there, because when Gary said personally, it usually meant no one is allowed to interfere, even if I'm driving us into a wall. For the tender, we needed the usual nightmare, proof of similar completed projects, financial statements for 2 years, certificates for subcontractors and manufacturers, guarantee letters, and most importantly, the draft contract with the city. The contract came from the city's legal department. We were allowed to propose changes if something was off. We sent it to John for a quick review. 2 days later, he wrote me, Ira, the contract is very standard, but there's one thing. Your CEO changed the clause about liability. Now the responsibility for regulatory compliance is personal on him, not on the company, on him. That's dangerous. I reread the clause. He was right. In the original version, it said the supplier guarantees compliance, meaning the company. In Gary's version, it said the supplier's general director personally assumes responsibility for compliance of deliveries with regulatory requirements and standards. Signature, George G. Stamp, text edited in his handwriting. I leaned back in my chair. You don't do that in contracts like this. It's not just stupid, it's basically putting handcuffs on yourself. I went straight to his office on the 3rd floor. Gary, John sees a problem with your change to the contract. It puts personal liability on you. I already read that contract, he cut me off. I don't need panic from parasites. I know what I'm doing. But it's really not safe. It's not standard. Standard is for people who don't make decisions. I make decisions. Thanks. You can go. He didn't even look up from his laptop, just waved me toward the door. I went downstairs and texted John that Gary was ignoring it. John replied, I'll try again directly. I have to at least explain it to him. He tried. Scheduled a meeting, it was moved. Scheduled another, moved again. Sent an email marked urgent. Silence. I saw that meeting in Gary's calendar as lawyers/contract, and every time it vanished right after he opened the day. On the 3rd attempt, John just wrote, okay, I did the work I'm paid for. The rest is his choice. I knew that tone. It wasn't offended. It was, I've left a record that I warned him. Then came the 2nd act, preparing the documents. Gary hated bureaucracy. He thought tender requirements were games for weaklings and that we weren't here to fill out forms. We were here to move progress forward. So he tuned the documents, his word, not mine. First he asked me, Ira, make the financials look nice. Show things a bit better. Nobody checks the details anyway. I told him financial statements are official. You don't draw numbers there. He smiled like a teacher listening to a naive child. Fine, I'll handle it myself, and went back to his office. Later, he came to me with a folder. Here's the letter about subcontractor experience. Sign that you saw the originals. I opened it. 3 years of big contracts for huge amounts with stamps I'd never seen before. Gary, where is this from? Don't worry about it. These are real jobs. They were just registered through partners. The city wants numbers. We give them numbers. That was the first time I really felt they were trying to drag me into the mess without my consent. I didn't sign. I said, I haven't seen the originals. He sighed. You're too by the book. I have people who aren't afraid to grow. Then he went to our young finance guy who'd been in the job for about a year and still believed the boss is always right. It got better from there. From the subcontractor certificates, Gary took old certificates from other projects and simply changed the dates. I saw it by accident when he asked me to just scan the package. In the scanner was a certificate for a subcontractor who hadn't worked with us for 6 months. The date made it look like he was with us now. I went to Mark. Look, Gary's messing with the documents. This is dangerous. Mark looked lost, like always. Well, he's the CEO. He knows what he's doing, and we really need this contract. We need a contract, not charges. I'll talk to him. He talked, and Gary came to my desk, smiling. Mark is worried. Don't be. Everything's under control. Same tone as, you're small. I'm big, so be quiet. We submitted the package. Gary acted like he'd already won. A week later, we were announced as the preliminary winner. There was champagne and a lot of, we did it. Then the audit showed up. In government contracts, there's a window after the preliminary result when competitors can file a complaint. One of our competitors did exactly that. The complaint went to the regulator. They launched a document review. I remember that Monday very clearly, 9:15 a.m. I hadn't even finished my coffee when 2 people in suits with IDs walked in. We're here about the LED tender. Who's responsible for financials and regulatory compliance? I looked at Gary. He was sitting in the meeting room, feet on the table, phone in hand. He looked very pleased with himself. That would be me, he said, getting up like they'd just come for an autograph. The review was like a cold shower. No yelling, no threats, just systematic questions. Here are the financials. Please provide confirmation from your auditor. Here's your experience letter. Please show the actual contracts and completion acts. Here's a subcontractor certificate. Why do the dates not match the registry? I sat next to them as the accountant and watched Gary lose a little bit of color with each question. After 3 hours, they asked for a short break and left the room. That's when Gary cracked for the first time. This is a setup. Competitors. They're trying to destroy us. I kept quiet. Ira, say something. Tell them these documents are normal. I can't. I haven't seen some of the originals. He looked at me like I'd just betrayed the country. But I hadn't betrayed anyone. I just refused to lie for him. When the auditors came back, they were brief. We've recorded signs of document falsification. The procedure is suspended. The materials are being sent further. Gary started explaining, rushing, talking about technical mistakes and wrong file version. Nobody cared anymore. 2 days later, we got the official letter. Tender canceled, company suspended from participation, further review opened on regulatory violations, and separately a demand for explanation under the clause about the CEO's personal responsibility. That evening, Mark called a meeting. Me, the finance guy, operations manager, and our lawyers, John included, quiet as always. Mark looked exhausted. Gary, what was that? This was war, our competitors. I did what needed to be done to win. John calmly opened a folder. George, the issue isn't only the documents. The issue is that you edited the contract so that personal responsibility lies with you. You wrote that in yourself. That's just wording. It doesn't matter. It matters. In case of regulatory violations, the responsible person is you, personally, not the company. That isn't our invention. That's your text. I watched the moment Gary finally understood, not that he made a mistake, but that he'd built his own trap and signed it. His own signature was now the main piece of evidence. He tried one last push. Then fix it. Your lawyers fix it. John didn't raise his voice. We warned you. You ignored us. The emails are there. The canceled meetings are there. The document is signed. It's valid. And now it's in the regulator's hands. The room went quiet. Mark cleared his throat. Gary, I have to remove you from the position today. It wasn't a show. It wasn't anger. It was either we lose the whole company or we lose one genius. Gary jumped up. You can't do this. I'm your friend. I did this for us. You did it for your ego, and now we're all cleaning it up. He shouted some more, slammed a door, threatened to sue, but the decision was made. The next morning, his access card didn't work. Security politely walked him out with a box of his things. On the way out, he tried one more time to stop John in the hallway. You could have saved me. John looked at him calmly. I tried, you wouldn't listen. After he left, we had a long month of damage control, writing statements, proving the company as a legal entity, didn't organize the falsifications, changing subcontractors, cleaning all the processes. It cost us nerves, money, and reputation, but we survived. Gary didn't. The regulator opened a separate case on him as the responsible officer, and the funniest part, if you can call anything here funny, was that the key argument against him was that same sentence he added because lawyers are parasites and slow business down. About a month and a half later, I heard he tried to get a job as a public procurement consultant at another firm. They even invited him in, but when HR asked, why were you removed from your last position, he started rambling about competitor sabotage and wrong audit. I heard that interview lasted 9 minutes. And there was one last small slap from reality. The company from abroad he'd once used to get cheaper documents sent him a folder with his name misspelled on the cover as a reference. Hard to build a career as a genius when your own signature is Exhibit A. Now, whenever someone in our office starts with lawyers are parasites or let's just tweak the papers a bit, we just look at each other and say, remember Gary? That's why we don't. Sometimes a person doesn't just sign a contract, they sign their own downfall. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.